with you for what you see happening in 2014 with on the sustainability front, and perhaps starting with whether we're going to get a better word than sustainability for all this stuff.
You must know that I really do not like the word sustainability, because for me, you know,
it's in your job title.
It's in my job title,
right,
and I am the first Chief Sustainability Officer at Coca-Cola, but that doesn't mean it's new to us. The word sustain means to sustain. It means to do things the same. And really what we're talking about is how do you find the intersection between business growth and creating social value? And so if someone in this audience can come up with a better word, I would welcome it, because I don't think it accurately represents what business is trying to do and the improvements that are happening around the world when people come together and work on these societal issues.
And my sense is that there's a sort of balance here between those who are skeptical of the whole idea,
yes,
and think that this is all marketing sort of greenwash or whatever,
well, yes,
and those who think this is the most important thing that there is in business today. So where do you think that balance will be in 2014?
Sure. Well, it's an overused buzzword, so no surprise that people are skeptical, because it's hard to figure out what's sustainable, what's not. There's a lot of confusing acronyms out there. As we think about 2014 and going forward, it's how do you move from just looking at sustainability as managing risk and taking out expense out of the business to truly creating value. So what's value creation mean? And looking at top line, and we've seen it in our business. We get a lot of questions, but one brief example is when we simply changed our packaging from regular PET packaging to using plant bottle packaging, which reduces the reliance on fossil fuels. We were able to tell that story, and we were rewarded by the consumer. We grew by 11% in our Dasani brand when we did that. We were relisted back into Walmart's, back into Kroger's, and the consumer said, I like this because you're telling me you're being responsible, you're really trying to innovate and create something that brings value to me, so I understand that it's still fully recyclable, but now I know that you're not using a resource that I don't necessarily support. So we know it can drive top-line growth, but I think we're just scratching the surface and figuring out how to measure it.
And that does seem to be an issue across the board, sort of measuring and convincing both internally and externally that there is business value to be driven from these programs. I think it was a recent Accenture global survey that suggested that the confidence of chief executives around the world on the business value front was, if anything, had gone backwards.
Yes.
So that this is obviously a real issue. Measurement is at the heart of it. What are you doing to measure? Measurement
is at the heart, and we work with E&Y, who validates a lot of our business metrics. And what's interesting, and they also came out with a study recently, that over 40% of the S&P 500 share owner proposals are within the environmental space. So it says that share owners care. So in the past, maybe you could say, well, business is in business to reward the share owner. Well, guess what? Those shareholders today, they want to see companies doing things in this space to better those communities, because without thriving communities, there's no business. So how do you measure? How do you show the true value? Well, there's a few ways you could do it. Well, if you become more water efficient in your business, you could look at what are the dollar savings. That's easy to quantify. Top line growth is different. So we've been working with E&Y, and this was the first year that they came in and they were able to validate 36 of our indicators in the space in our sustainability report. We published it, and they used a process where they audited us just like they do on our financial metrics. They audited us on our sustainability metrics. And we had to prove and show the progress, and if it was repeatable, and if it was going to continue in that trajectory. So, without going into a lot of details, because it would take hours, and it was about a year's worth of work just to get to this place, and we still have a lot more work to do.
Okay. You mentioned water.
Mm-hmm.
What are the other areas that you're particularly focusing on?
So water, women, and well-being. I call them my W's. W's for winning in society, winning in the world. Water, women, well-being. Water, simply, it's 90% plus of our ingredient base. It's critically important to the growth of our business. It's also the lifeblood of society. Without water, there is nothing else. And we know that. And just to ask the audience a question, how many of you took a shower today for at least 1 minute? All right? Pretty warm, right? Yeah, everyone next to you is looking, saying, I hope you took a shower. Well, we know how critically important water is, because in that 1 minute, 3 children died from lack of access to clean, safe drinking water. It's a real issue. We also know it's an issue that's solvable. And without healthy, thriving communities and companies that care to put the resources behind an issue like water, we won't have a business. And so water is number one, and it cuts across everything. Women for us is also critically important because it's 70% of our purchaser base. We also know that women stabilize local communities. And women, when they earn $1, so sorry for the men in the room, but when a woman earns $1, she gives 90 cents back to her community to support key initiatives to thrive. Men, sorry, you only give about 60 cents, so you need to work a little harder. But we know for us, when you empower women, and I can tell you a quick story, this lady, Rosemary, who was a recycler in Brazil in one of the poorest favelas. Rosemary, you know, people would walk on the other side of the street from her. Yet she was cleaning up her community. It's an admirable job, and she needed to have some pride and dignity in what she was doing. She worked with Coca-Cola because one of our local route drivers there saw her and met her and talked to her, helped her on how to figure out how to put clean standards in place, how to sell her waste for more money in the aftermarkets, and then how to work with artisan communities. Today, Rosemary just bought her first house. She employs 700 other families, and she has a thriving business. And I can tell you that for her, it was really important to have that dignity and pride. But for us too, making sure that we're supporting women who we know are going to help other women and help their communities ultimately helps our business. And then well-being. We know that we deal with the contrast of undernutrition to overnutrition. And it's really important as you just were looking at what's happening in emerging markets. We want to make sure that we acknowledge that we have to be a part of the solution, because if you look at obesity, people used to think that was only an issue in a developed country. That's an issue in countries all around the world today, from India to Africa, you name it. How do we make sure that we're a part of the solution and partnering with people to build the right innovations and sweeteners, to put programs to get people to move, which we can talk about our program that we're getting people to move. And how do you do that where you can partner with civil society to create a better environment for the long term? So I know I kind of went round and round, but you know, water, women, well-being, we feel that those 3 areas globally are critically important. We also, though, have a 10-point scorecard to make sure we're focusing on packaging, sustainable agriculture, climate. So we don't ignore the other things that are also important to the world, but what we've said globally is these are the top 3.
Okay, a couple of questions on that, and then I want to come to Michael. But on well-being, you know, simple question would be, why do you sell this sugary stuff? Why not just sell the, you know, if you just sold the diet stuff, that would solve, you know, 99% of the problem, would it not? So what's stopping you from doing that?
Well, you know, we look at a total balanced portfolio, and it's about consumer choice for us. So we do have the largest portfolio of low and no-calorie products. So we have, out of our 3,500 products, a third of those in low and no calorie, and in some places it's actually a lot higher. And we believe that, you know, Coca-Cola, it's been, you know, the brand that was created by Dr. Pemberton in a pharmacy, and it's a brand we stand behind. We do want to make sure, though, where people don't want the calories, if they're not physically active or if they can't have sugar, that they have a choice. And so for us, it's simply wrapped around this notion of let's give people choice. But I will tell you that...
Is it just choice, or do you seek to actively push people towards the diet variants?
We make sure that they know it's available, it's aware, and we have goals and commitments to ensure that we've shifted our shelf space. So shelf space, when you go into a grocery store, if you've been in a grocery store, you can see what's on a shelf. It used to be almost all, you know, one type of brand on that shelf. Now we make sure that at least a third of that is Coke Zero, Diet Coke, Sprite Zero, so the choice is right there front and center. Because what we found is actually it's not just enough to advertise. We do advertise our whole portfolio. We advertise, for example, if you look at sports in the United States, most of the sports relationships we have are around Coke Zero. But consumers, you know, don't necessarily respond to that. So they have to be able to try it several times to build that flavor profile to say, I really like what I'm trying. You don't just necessarily wake up, and you probably know this, and for anyone who has kids, you know this. Your kids will probably, you know, say, if I don't like this, I'm not going to buy it, I'm not going to drink it. So it's more than just advertising. It's making sure it's available and then encouraging people to try, you know, the diets and lights if they don't have an active, healthy lifestyle. And that's really important.
Okay, Michael, let's come to you. And first of all, you're, and I want to hear about the partnership in a minute that one has with Coca-Cola. But what about the broader picture for 2014 as far as you're concerned? What do you see happening?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, Daniel. It's a slightly surreal experience for me because I'm at an event at the first magazine I worked for, in the headquarters of the third magazine I worked for, across the street from the headquarters of the second magazine I worked for. So I think I'll just kind of stay here and sort of wallow in nostalgia. I think in 2014, sustainability, as Bea says, is going to increasingly feature in business calculations, prodded by advocacy groups like ours, I'm sure. And I think the reason for that, as Bea indicated, is twofold. First of all, because there is enormous opportunity, enormous business opportunity in dealing with issues in a sustainable way. There are either cost reduction, or there are, for that matter, just opportunities in parts of the world where sustainability is key. You know, my old friend Jacob Frankel was saying just earlier that, you know, something like 90% of population growth in the next 20 years is going to be in the developing world. An awful lot of that is going to be in Africa. And there are huge opportunities for businesses in creating sustainable operations in the developing world. But there's also risk if they don't. There is also risk if they don't. We live in a hyper-connected world in which anything that any business does in any part of the world is immediately communicable around the world instantly. And in which business practices and business operations that might not pass muster to an increasingly watchful civil society around the world will just kind of get picked up.
So what conclusions, for example, would you draw from the tragedy at Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, where you had clearly a lot of dreadful practices going on in a building, but you also had companies that had invested enormous amounts of time and energy and money in their sustainable business practices that were involved in that, drawn into it in one way or another?
Well, I was told just a couple of weeks ago about one major sourcing company, I won't mention its name, who has hundreds now, literally hundreds, of compliance officers in Bangladesh that they did not have before the Rana Plaza tragedy, because they know that reputation is a real factor. It's a particular factor. It's a particular factor with millennial consumers. Because they are hyper-connected, because they are kind of constantly on social media, because they are incredibly international in a way that I don't think a lot of American or European businesses kind of quite get. When I first lived in the United States in 1974, 3.4% of the population foreign-born, now more than 13% of the population foreign-born. And of course in the under 30s, massively more than that. That means people have connections all over the world. They have the technology to use those connections, and they really know what's going on. And every survey of millennial consumer behavior that I've seen, CNA did a great one, Deloitte's did a great one, you've seen the same stuff, Bea, just absolutely conclusively proves that millennials really keep an extremely close eye on corporate behavior and on corporate reputation.
I can see they do that, or they say they do that, but is it really true in the sense of, you know, when it comes to buying the clothes that the same millennials are looking for, aren't they also just looking for the cheapest? And I mean, aren't we all a little bit, as consumers, hypocritical on this front? Not all, but a lot of us, perhaps. Some of us are very discerning. But
I am not at all cynical about this generation of kids. I think they really walk the walk and talk the talk. And, you know, frankly, you know, one of our division's business model is in essence based on the fact of course consumerism. So, you know, product red, you go into an Apple store, you buy a red Nano, you go to Starbucks, you buy a red Starbucks, money goes directly to the Global Fund. Coke and ourselves have got a fund program going on that too. Red has now raised $250 million for the Global Fund in just over 6 years. $250 million for the Global Fund. And that is all because consumers are going into a Red store or to a Starbucks store, or going on, a Fat Boy and kind of getting some beanbags or what have you, and making conscious consumer choices to go with products and to go with programs that really make a difference. I'm slightly biased because I've got two daughters who are kind of slap bang in the middle of their 20s, and I see what they and their friends do in terms of the consumer choices that they make and in terms of the products that they like buying. And I have lost all cynicism about millennials' absolute conviction that they are really serious when they look at corporate reputations and a corporate product. So kind of a long way of saying, I think B is absolutely right. There are tremendous business opportunities there, but in an increasingly energetic sense of cause consumerism and of reputation management, there are risks if they're not.
Tell us about this program that you have jointly. It has to do with dance.
Yeah, I mean, I think this isn't really a kind of electronic dance music crowd. I'm sort of guessing.
I'm not sure.
You might be surprised.
We might have to have you stand up and dance.
You can go to cokeredmoves.com. And I'm sure readers of The Economist spend half their time doing video selfies of themselves dancing, right? So if you go to cokeredmoves.com, you'll see a terrific track that we did for World AIDS Day, which is where I'm still wearing my AIDS ribbon last Sunday. You can see a terrific electronic dance music track with all sorts of kind of wonderful EDM people, and then if you upload a video to the YouTube and Vice website of yourself dancing to the track, then that generates a generous contribution by Coca-Cola to the Global Fund. So cokeredmoves.com, have a look at it.
And how many people have done this so far?
More than 500 people, right? I'm just looking to my team over there.
Oh, it keeps growing.
Yeah. What's the latest number?
610 as of last night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So 610 people have uploaded videos, and what were you saying?
There's over
6 million,
6 million page views.
So
And really, it just launched, so that's tremendous. It shows you the interest, back to the millennial conversation.
Exactly.
It shows you the interest because that's who's doing it.
yeah.
Okay, so we have to move to Q&A. Who would like to ask a question on any of these issues without electronic dance movement? Any questions?
Or we could get them to dance.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's
Yeah.
one at the back there. And if you could wait for the mic and.
Just on the topic of measurement, is there anything that you guys are doing with other companies, competitors, to come up with a single way of measuring? Because I'm sure other companies are going through similar challenges with measuring what sustainability looks like.
Sure, I'm happy to take that. Absolutely. With the work that we started with E&Y, we recognized that we weren't the only company struggling with how do you put metrics around these enablers. And so there's a group of companies that have come together, and I don't think I'm at liberty to say who, but you could look at the top companies who are focused on sustainability, and it's an easy discussion. One that I know I can say is the leader is Unilever. If you just look at what Unilever is doing in Paul Pullman, he has been talking about this and leading these efforts for a very long time. And every time you listen to their earnings reports or calls, it's same part of the conversation. And so listening and learning from companies like Unilever and bringing others around the table who have this desire and passion, because it's going to be critically important that we have a common language, common metrics, common view as we talk to the analyst community or other key stakeholders. So there are many of what you would consider those top companies that are working and meeting on a regular basis.
I absolutely second what Bea just said, but there's a really important point here. When you look at the kind of corporate landscape of people who really step up on sustainability, on corporations who really partner with anti-poverty advocacy groups like us, who really partner on global health issues, all credit to them. It's the same guys every time. I mean, that Bea should kind of mention Paul Pullman and Unilever. if Paul was on the if Paul was up here, he'd mention Mutar, Kent, and Coke, and of course there are others, But I get a little depressed.
Why is that? I mean,
I get a little.
If it was all as obvious as you said earlier on, that you can see the value, the millennials are all for it, and so on, you would think that everybody would be on this particular bandwagon, but they're not, clearly.
No, they're not, and I think we would say that some of the most successful companies are, and that there's probably kind of not a kind of negative correlation there. But no, you're right. I mean, not everyone. I
think a good analogy is what happened with technology. I mean, think about social media. I mean, I was in marketing before I was in this role. And I remember talking in early 2000 around what's going to happen in social media, looking at Facebook, Google, and people used to, think we were crazy. Well, that's not going to last. It's just a short-term trend. It'll end. So I think we're almost at the same place, even though companies have been doing sustainability for many years, over 100 years in some cases. It's now just becoming a part of the fabric of society because 50% of the global population today is under the age of 27. That is the millennial generation. Nielsen just did a study with 29,000 consumers in 58 countries, and it was the millennial generation who said, in the future, I will only purchase brands who tell me what they're doing for society and how they're creating value. And so I think that we're at that tipping point right now where the companies who weren't on board before, they won't have a choice. They will have to look at this as a total part of their business, because if not, they run the risk of not being in business in the next, 20, 30, 40 years, because that's what's coming.
Yeah.
Question at the front here, and then one there. You were first, were they? Okay, sorry. And then if I could ask you to be brief, then we can.
All this is very nice, but it seems a big yes, but take water, for instance, as a primary plus that needed good water, and yet the impact of both fracking and biofuels is just tearing into it. I don't know how they're going to balance that out, or, the way we're cleaning out the oceans.
Right.
Shall we take the other question as well, and we can perhaps take them both together for answers?
I want to ask this in the nicest possible way, but your company is one of the biggest users of plastic, and most of your products are in plastic containers, and the impact on society and the environment of plastic isn't exactly a positive. So it seems to me that there's another side to what you're saying vis-a-vis your own company, and I'd ask for you to respond to that.
Sure. No, I'm happy to do that. And you're not saying something that I don't personally feel. I'll be honest, when I took this job, I'll tell you what my son said to me at the time. He was 10 years old. And he pulled out that same Dasani bottle that I started the conversation with, and he said, Mom, he said, you're Coca-Cola. Why does this only say 30% plant bottle when I know you can get to 100? You're Coca-Cola. And why aren't you doing more in this space? And I will tell you, so as a corporate person representing Coke, I felt it, but as a mom, hearing that come from my son, it made this job that much more real for me. And what I realize is that, no, we can't run from the waste we create. That's why we have to do something about it. We have to set publicly stated goals and bring people together to help solve these issues. And we have to innovate. So we are innovating in this space. We set goals around recovery, so 70% recovery in developed countries is our target. We put infrastructure in place on college campuses around recycling bins and even pickup, because we found in some local cities there were no recycling programs. Or if there was a recycling program, it was still going to a landfill. And we realized that this issue is so big, we're not the only one dealing with this tragedy, frankly, because it is. It's how do you clean up your communities and get people to partner with you so you can truly drive that change? And the two biggest barriers we did, because I wanted to better understand why weren't people recycling? Because then we had started putting the infrastructure in place, but the recovery rates were still fairly low. And there were two things that came up: lack of education. So people need to really understand more, what is the issue we're talking about when there's waste being created? How do you take that waste and turn it into value and turn it into something else? And so, and I'll talk about one program we have
very
there.
quickly.
Very quickly. And so we set the publicly stated goals, but we know we can't do it alone. We know we need to work with others. We know we need to create awareness around the issue and create education, and then make it cool. And so we worked with celebrity, will.i.am, who came to us with an idea to say, why don't you take programs that we already know people through Red want to buy products that are cool, that actually add value. Why don't you take those bottles and turn them into something else? And so we partnered with Levi's Jeans, who created their 501 jeans out of 7 Coca-Cola bottles, or Beats Headphones, who then created the EcoCycle brand. It's just the early part of the journey, but we realize that it's not enough just to have the infrastructure and educate. We have to make it cool for this next generation to take the action to recycle, and we have to hold ourselves accountable in how we do that and the role we play. So I absolutely appreciate that question.
Okay, we are out of time, but I want to ask you for a quick 20-second each prediction for 2014. Michael, first of all.
My predictions are rather sad, well, apart from the fact that Liverpool win the Premiership. My predictions are rather kind of downbeat one, actually. I see no improvement in the political toxicity in Washington in 2014.
Okay, mine's a little different. I'm more hopeful. I believe in this next generation, and I believe that in 2014, we're going to start to see consumer passion really heighten to work towards solving these critical issues we're talking about today. And I think this is the start. 2014 is the start of that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.